In pro wrestling and in life in general, you've got to be able to be an advocate for yourself. Take Kane, for example. Kane's a fella who seemed like he'd take any old wrestling storyline that was thrown his way, but that might not have been the smartest move, because that's how he ended up with Katie Vick, fake Kane, and corporate Kane. Maybe if Kane were more discerning, he could have avoided all of that. I'm Senior Siete for 7 Rasslin, and let's take a look at 7 storylines that WWE superstars refuse to do. Before we get into this, we appreciate your support, so if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hip toss that notification bell. Number 1. The King of Kings. The 2024 King of the Ring tournament was one for the ages with a stellar bout between Randy Orton and Gunther in the finals. Well, stellar until the very end. Yeesh. But one thing that made the culmination of this prestigious event a bit odd was the fact that the Ring General, now the King General, never actually put the crown on his head, which is odd because chief creative fella Triple H made such a big deal of putting the Queen of the Ring crown on Nia Jax after she squished Aliyah Valkyria like a bug. Even the next night on Raw, he just came to the ring and held the crown like it was some kind of trophy. Bret Hart wore it, Owen Hart wore it, Triple H, Triple H never wore it. Watch this. Todd Pettengill hands Triple H's newly won crown, and instead of putting it on, the then Connecticut Blue Blood proceeds to smash it over Mankind's head. And apparently that wasn't an isolated incident. In his Something to Wrestle With podcast, Bruce Pritchard would say that Triple H absolutely hated the idea of wearing the crown because it looked hokey. This? Hokey? Come on! This would set up a bit of a battle between Helmsley and McMahon, as Vince insisted that since Hunter was the king, he should support the gimmick. But what could Hunter do? The crown was already smashed over Mankind's head, so McMahon proceeded to order more and more crowns, and with each crown that was presented to Hunter, he found another reason to smash it. Eventually, McMahon gave up and allowed his future son-in-law to not look like a moron, which means present-day Hunter really doesn't have a leg to stand on when it comes to getting Gunther to wear his crown. Number 2. Slaughter's Limit. The WrestleMania showdown between American-made Hulk Hogan and the Iraqi turncoat Sergeant Slaughter isn't one of the most beloved storylines of all time. But it might be the most bravest? No, that doesn't feel right. Gutsiest, maybe? It took guts to represent the nation we're actively at war with on national television. I mean, real people were dying, so it was obviously in questionable taste. But yeah, it was definitely a thing. Sergeant Slaughter, the former real American hero, would denounce the United States and declare his loyalty to the nation of Iraq, who had invaded the neighboring Kuwait on August 2nd, 1990, claiming historical territorial rights and accusing Kuwait of economic warfare through oil overproduction. And this undertaking, supporting Iraq, was no joke for Slaughter. His family received death threats, and it's rumored that the reason that WrestleMania 7 was moved from the Los Angeles Coliseum to the Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena was because of security issues. Or they couldn't sell enough tickets. Probably the latter. Slaughter and his manager, Saddam Hussein look-like General Adnan, would pull all kinds of shenanigans to prove to the WWE Universe that they were terrible. They would steal the WWE title from the Ultimate Warrior. They'd run around in boots that were supposedly a gift from Saddam Hussein himself. And, oh, horror of horrors, they would burn a Hulk Hogan t-shirt. Honestly, no greater symbol of our great nation exists other than Hulk Hogan merchandise. Well, maybe there's one greater symbol. That's right, the pitch was made to Slaughter to actually burn an American flag on national television. But fearing that he might be crossing the line, Slaughter absolutely refused. So instead, it was just said that he had burnt an American flag behind the arena. And apparently that was enough. Death threats and bomb threats rained in. This led to Slaughter being followed at all times by armed guards. At one point, the FBI even insisted he wear a bulletproof mesh under his gear. But at least he got to participate in one of the most poorly regarded WrestleMania main events of all time. Number 3. Owen's Love Triangle. Wrestling storytelling doesn't have to be super complex. Sometimes A simple love triangle is all it takes to set the action in motion. Worked for the Mega Powers, worked for Matt Hardy, Lita, and Edge, but it did not work for Owen Hart. In the late 90s, Owen was one half of a pretty successful tag team with Jeff Jarrett. The duo, which never got a cool name, was managed by the former Mrs. Mongo and future Mrs. Stone Cold, Deborah McMichael. You can probably see where this is leading. The pitch was made to Owen that eventually he would develop feelings for McMichaels, and that would lead to a feud between he and Jarrett. However, Owen refused, stating that he was married and had children, and he didn't want his kids to have to answer salacious questions on the playground. This one has a bit of a dark follow-up, as it's rumored that because of Owen being unwilling to participate in the angle with Deborah, that they decided to make him become the Blue Blazer again as a punishment. The new version of the Blazer had an element that mocked WCW star Sting's entrance of rappelling from the rafters. This led to a stunt going horribly wrong, where Owen ended up falling to his death at the 1999 Over the Edge pay-per-view, one of the darkest moments in professional wrestling history. However, whether or not the punishment story is true, that has never been verified. Number 4. Chad Frost. Young Rock was a pretty weird show. As the seasons went on, we got to see more and more of The Rock's early tenure in the WWE, which meant we got to see a Hollywood version of Triple H, China, The Undertaker, and of course, Chad Frost. Wait, who? According to Young Rock, Chad Frost was one of the biggest names in the WWE back in the late 90s. Still drawing a blank? Yeah, we were too. Well, in the storyline for the episode, The Rock was absolutely convinced that Triple H was bad-mouthing him to Vince McMahon, but it turned out that the person who was really saying negative things about him was Chad Frost. Now, as we later learn, Chad Frost was a made-up character because The Rock didn't feel like stirring up a hornet's nest with the actual person because they are still very involved in WWE programming. As in, that person is absolutely in charge of NXT. That's right, Chad Frost is none other than the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. And as several people will attest, the WWE tried to make a Michaels vs. Rock match happen in the late 90s and early 2000s, but The Rock shot it down each time. Even in a 2005 interview on WWE.com, The Rock would say, "I was never interested in working with him, to be honest with you. I've known him for a long time. He came in and worked for my family in Hawaii when I was like 13. Him and Marty Jannetty, it was just one of those things." And apparently, that alludes to Michaels being a jerk to The Rock's grandmother, who also was on Young Rock. See? Full circle. Wayne's own father, Rocky Johnson, even tells a story about The Rock ending up on top of Shawn Michaels in a backstage brawl after Shawn Michaels smarted off to The Rock after being too stiff with the sweet chin music. Fortunately, The Rock and Shawn have been able to patch things up since. Number 5. All in the Family. Ryan Shamrock is a bit of an odd footnote in WWE history. A performer known as Alicia Webb was brought into the company to portray Ken Shamrock's younger sister. Basically, she'd be hot, other wrestlers would notice, and Ken Shamrock would beat them up. Yeah, just like Shakespeare. It started off with Val Venus putting the moves on the Junior Shamrock, and then Billy Gunn would flirtatiously moon her, which I guess is how you put the moves on a girl when you're an ass man. Bah, bah. Sorry about that. Anyhow, Ryan Shamrock would have an unremarkable career as the attractive thing that men fight over. Eventually, she'd join up with Terry Reynolds and Jacqueline to be a part of the Pretty Mean Sisters faction. She'd leave the WWE shortly afterwards and end up at WCW as Symphony, the muse of the wrestler known as Maestro. But what Ryan is probably best known for is an angle that was proposed but never happened. You see, Vince McMahon was heavily pushing for Ryan Shamrock to enter into a romantic relationship with the one wrestler on the roster that she probably shouldn't, her storyline brother, Ken Shamrock. And if you want an extra layer of ick to be added to this ick sandwich, Ken Shamrock's real son is named, you guessed it, Ryan Shamrock. Fortunately, the former UFC champion put the kibosh on this gross idea, and it never came to be. Shamrock would even go so far as to say that the reason he left WWE was because of angles like that. Ugh. Well, at least, Ken and Ryan weren't actually related. Vince would have to be a real psycho to pitch something like that between actual siblings. Number 6. All in the Family 2. Oh, no, seriously? All right, here we go. Vince McMahon has never been one to show a ton of restraint when it comes to trying to make a buck, so maybe it isn't surprising when he tried to build a storyline around his daughter Stephanie McMahon's very real pregnancy. In a video where Stephanie and Triple H joke about how Vince was trying to convince them to put their wedding on pay-per-view, Hunter makes a joke about how Vince would livestream Stephanie giving birth if they'd let him. See, I want to think that was a joke, but the lines are so blurred. Anyhow, Stephanie would go on to tell us that one of the only times she shot down a storyline from her father is when he pitched a reveal where we'd learned that the actual father of her baby was Vince himself. A father and a daughter. And sorry to pull on this string, but where do you go from there? In canon, the owner of the company has fathered a child with his daughter. What's the payoff? Where does this lead? What kind of home episode of X-Files horror are we getting at here? Sorry, the writer in me just popped a spring. But like you said, fortunately, Stephanie was sane enough to shoot down this horrific idea, and Vince would come back to her, thankfully, with a very level-headed pitch. Just kidding. He wanted her brother Shane McMahon to be the father. Ugh, I'm sorry about that. Let's finish this off with a fun one. Number 7, the Taker Rooney. Nobody has taken a gimmick to the stratosphere quite like The Undertaker. When he was Mean Mark, just a ginger with a heart punch, nobody cared. When he started claiming souls and digging holes, now you're onto something. The dead man would hover at the top of the card for the better part of 30 years. To put that into perspective, Steve Austin started the WWE in 1996 and retired from in-ring competition 7 years later. So it makes all the sense in the world that The Undertaker would do anything in his power to protect his precious gimmick. He didn't do many out-of-character interviews. He always wore black. He got like a million creepy tattoos. He never danced with Rikishi. He never joined the Kiss My Rear End Club. He certainly never did a spin-a-rooney. I'm sorry. For the uninitiated, the spin-a-rooney is a breakdance backspin that was popularized by Booker T. And this is important. Now, when you go to a live broadcast of Monday Night Raw, the show doesn't end when the camera's cut. Often there will be a quick main event or some manner of interaction that tends to be more lighthearted and fun because it isn't being broadcast to the world. And one such incident that happened August 12, 2002 involved practically the entire locker room trying to convince The Undertaker to do a spin-a-rooney. It started with Booker T trying to convince him, but Taker made the point that he would be committing gimmick infringement, so out comes The Rock. He tries his best to convince the American Badass, but also fails. Oh, maybe this was the catalyst for WrestleMania 40. Full circle. The Undertaker literally looks at the camera and says, "I'm not going to do it, Vince, so you better send the cavalry." Cue the cavalry, Triple H, and mind you, Triple H is the biggest heel in the company at this point, and he hits the line of the night by saying, "We send the dead man walking, now we want to see the dead man spinning." From there, the Un-Americans come out, and finally Vince McMahon himself comes out to try to make this happen. He strikes a deal that he'll do a McMahon-a-Rooney in exchange for a Taker-Rooney, and know that the McMahon-a-Rooney was friggin' terrible. Still, nothing from Taker. Goldust-a-Rooney, followed by Triple H-a-Rooney. The Undertaker started a brawl so he could get out of there. Ooh, bad Undertaker. But yeah, never got to see that Taker-Rooney. Well, there's our list. Did we forget any WWE superstars who refuse certain angles? If so, leave them in the comments section below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and hip toss that notification bell. Until next time, I'm Singer Siete for 7 Rasslin saying bye-bye.